Thanks for coming in, and really want to talk today about a topic that's not always easy. Sometimes we have pretty easy topics, like organization, homework, preparation for the high school academic program, whatever it is. Get a little more upbeat, a little more, we can sort of idea we know what we're doing and we can help out in a positive way. Bullying is a tougher topic, and really we're going to talk more about conflict today than bullying. I'll talk a little about the differences. But it is a tougher topic, and we're going to share some of the things we see, some of the things we try to do, point you towards some resources if you need some assistance. First off, we have really good kids at BCI, but we still have issues in the way that they treat each other. And sometimes the first thing a parent says to me when her son is being picked on is, I sent my son to BC High, so this wouldn't happen. And I hope people continue to say that because we do work really hard to try to make sure it doesn't happen. We're also working with adolescents, so they're not perfect, no matter what environment we put them in. We do a lot to educate the boys at Mistomas, and Ms. Hornby, sorry, I should have introduced you right from the start. Mistomas is our 8th grade guidance counselor. Ms. Hornby is our 7th grade guidance counselor. They're here. We do quite a bit of programming. They just did a program, or they've finished up with all the 7th and 8th graders. Had talks with them about something we call power words, which language is typically the most common way that they cause pain to each other these days. But we do a lot of things like that. We also try to really know your sons well, so we can more easily identify and support likely targets, but also try to really know the kid who's struggling, going through something that may lead him to be lashing out in a very negative way that impacts other students. So there's a lot that goes on. We're going to talk a little, as I said today, about bullying and about conflict. And what we mostly see at BC High, when we kind of break it all down, is adolescent conflict. And kids, often friends, sometimes really good friends, get annoyed with each other. And if they're good friends, they also know each other's buttons and where those buttons are and how to press those buttons. And so when they're annoyed with each other, they do press those buttons and cause reactions. They go at each other. And sometimes it's not out of any malice at all. It's out of just pushing one thing too far until someone is hurt. Things that start off pretty benign can become painful to one of the students in the group. And I'll try to talk through that a little more explicitly. But it goes on the line and gets worse. And then other times it's they spend too much time together. Particularly those guys who ride the train together every day. Sometimes we see, there's a group of 6th, 7th graders who get on the train together every morning, and they're just great. They're excited to be with each other. About 6 weeks into school, they all know each other's buttons, and they start pressing them, and they cause problems along the way. One time, I remember the story that stands out for me. I think it was our 3rd year. We got here at 7:15 in the morning, and there was 2 parents and a child waiting outside my office to talk to me. And they came in and we talked, and my son had been beaten up on the train by a bully the day before. I was horrified. The boy jumped on this boy, grabbed his hoodie and pulled the strings so the kid couldn't see, and did some stuff. And so Mr. Devlin, who was the guidance counselor at the time, and I were ready to throw kids out of school, horrified by the whole incident. So we started to talk to the boys who'd been involved, perpetrators. We did a lot of talking, a lot of stern talking, and eventually we started listening and realized there was much more to the story than initially we'd seen. And so finally we went back to the original victim who come in with his parents, and we said, so let me get this straight, because this is what we're hearing. You poured a Coke on this other boy's head on the train. And then he ran down the aisle and tackled you and did so. He said, yeah. And so The supposed bully had you pouring a Coke on his head. I mean, and you got Coke all over the seat on the train and stuff too. Yeah, but he was being rude to my friend. And I said, wait a minute. So you want me to suspend him because he jumped on you, but the first thing you did was pour Coke on his head. So oftentimes it is more complicated. And I always try to remember that because from the parents who came in, their son had been jumped on, his hoodie and pulled up, and he came home all upset. When we got back to the point that their son had actually started the whole thing by pouring Coke on him, was that they were a little more chagrined about the whole thing. So just it's a big part of it is oftentimes there are things that go on back and forth in conflict. So just to sort of talk about conflict, we all have to remember adolescence is difficult. And friendships are very difficult during adolescence. They're great at times, but they're also terrible at times because adolescents don't have great social skills. And so you start with friendships, and part of the things that challenge friendships are the fact that things change all the time. You have two friends, and all of a sudden one friend starts to mature more quickly, and his interests change. And maybe his the other friend still says, "You want to come over and play?" And this friend says, "Come over and play." No, we don't do that. We'll hang out. And that's a big difference between playing and hanging out in sort of their world. And this guy says, "I don't even know what hanging out means because I still want to have you over to play." And so that's part of it, and that gets complicated. Other things get complicated. You get different friends. All of a sudden, this guy's working with a new group in social studies to work on a project, and he's meeting these guys, and he's got good friends with them, but this guy's not in that class. And so now the friendship is being torn that way. Or, you see tables switch around in these sports seasons, different teams come together. The two guys were on football together, now one's on basketball, one's on hockey. They're not talking the same way anymore, but they don't know what that means because they used to sit together at lunch, now they don't sit together at lunch. Does that mean they're mad at each other? They don't even know. So there's a lot of things that go on that make it complicated. And on top of that, they're boys, and a big piece of adolescent boy world is teasing. And some of that is good and some of that's terrible. Masterminds and Women. It came out about 4 years ago, I think. It's still my favorite book on boys. There's a great, and it's written for parents. There's a great chapter in here on what I'm talking about today. Some of the stuff I took from it. There's wonderful things in there. I recommend it. You can see my copy. I've got like every third page folded down there. So there's a lot I like about the book. There is a lot in here about just how you give good advice to parents. And we'll talk about some of it for more details I'd recommend. But one of the things she does is she talks about 3 types of teasing. There's good teasing. So two boys, they're good friends, they tease each other back and forth, they know each other's limits, they don't go below the limits, they don't go below the waist, they keep it and they're good with it. And they know that's part of being friends with each other, and they feel good about that. Then she describes ignorant teasing, and that's when one of the boys goes over the line and doesn't know it goes over the line. He thinks what he's doing is fine, the other boy gets upset with it. Usually, if you can get them to talk, the first boy will apologize. He feels legitimately bad. He doesn't need to go over the line. If he go over the line, he can apologize, and that's good. The third part of teasing is the one that we all worry about, and that's the more malicious teasing. And the first one, the good teasing, can look pretty malicious from an outsider, because they can be really rude to each other and say awful things, but yet they think it's funny. They're good with it. Malicious teasing, is when you have somebody that's really trying to manipulate the situation. The hardest thing comes with groups, because two boys teasing each other tends to work. They know their limits and they keep it within. Once you start to add more people to it, it's harder. The boy who is comfortable because his friend says some joke about him, whatever it is less comfortable when it's 4 guys saying that to him. And he really can't go back at all 4 because that's too complicated. For whatever reason, on that day, on the train or at the lunch table or at recess or wherever it is, the 4 decide they all think it's funny to pick on this guy. And again, it may not even be that they're trying to hurt him. That just happened to be what happened that day. The day before it might have been, this guy who was getting picked on by 4. fine with him, he thought it was fine, but now it goes over. It's different. Or the fact that, hey, 3 days in a row, I don't know, it's definitely. But you also have, you do have some guys who manipulate groups. You know, the guy who is the mastermind, as she refers to in the title of the book, who, you know, will recognize the power dynamic in the group and use the teasing to direct who gets teased and how low things go. And so you can get some pretty malicious behavior there. On top of all this, or added to all this, is the stuff that we didn't have as kids, and that's social media. So you throw normal back and forth at each other, and you put that on social media, and it becomes far more toxic. And it's obvious. I mean, the most important thing is if I say something rude to somebody, and I see their face, and I see it was not taken in the way I intended it, I can take it back instantly. And it's just the two of us talking. But on social media, I put something out there that I think is going to be funny, and it turns out to be really bad, and I don't even know until 24 hours later that this guy was really hurt by it. And I may never know he was hurt by it. So there's that. There's also the anonymity of social media, or the feeling of anonymity. So guys will say things that are purposely hurtful on social media. And there's the sort of multiplier effect of, someone said that to me on social media when I went to school tomorrow, all 325 kids in the Arrupe division really know about it. That may only be 5 guys actually know about it, but the thought is everybody knows about it because it was on Instagram, it was on Snapchat, it was on whatever we're using. So, and then because of all those things, the vulnerable kids, also there's a legitimate fear. And so sometimes people attack out of fear. If I keep attacking, no one's going to attack me. So you add that to it. So social media is toxic. Anyone who tells, I'm one of those cranky guys who thinks that adolescents shouldn't be anywhere near social media because there's no redeeming value to it. So that's just my stance. I'm sure other people think differently, but be a middle school principal sometimes. We'll find no redeeming value to social media. So that's sort of the big picture we have. We're dealing with. We're dealing with guys that are trying to figure out friendship at an awkward time when they're all changing. At a time, they're trying to find the appropriate level of teasing because teasing is part of what they do. But it's so easy to go in the wrong direction. And then we have social media added to this, which can make it difficult. So guys, as we go through the middle school years, in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade are the biggest years for bullying. So guys are going to have times when they are attacked or insulted in some way, oftentimes by their friends who may not even mean it, other times by their friends who do mean it because their friends are mad at them. And occasionally, and this is I think pretty rare here, by a sort of really malicious kid that's trying to manipulate the whole class. That's, again, we don't see as much of that, much more between friends and trying to fix that up. So Jen and Tracy work much more with the guys when they are struggling through this. So I'm going to let them talk a little bit about what kind of things they see, things to pay attention to.
Thank you. Good morning. I think we just want to talk a little bit further about what you might see and what we see on our end and then how we handle situations. But first I want to go back to a little bit more discussion on that peer conflict piece because it is different than the teasing. The peer conflict we tend to see come up at times, and essentially what it is it's a disagreement between 2 individuals or a group of students. It tends to comes up in some of these group project situations, so things like the city project that the 7th graders are really heavily involved in right now. Boys are working together trying to attain this common goal, but they're looking at it from very different lenses. They're coming at it with different skill sets and experiences. So conflict might arise. What happens is most of the time we might not even know about that conflict. You might not see anything. The boys do a great job of kind of self-monitoring the situation. They might even come to agreements on their own, and they may be able to, in fact, sort of change some of their own behavior to find some middle ground. At other points in time, they need a little bit more direction from either us or parents to help them really get together, communicate, again, to reach that middle ground. But the good news is this conflict is totally normal, it's very much age appropriate, and it offers just an incredible learning opportunity and this moment for them to grow and develop these skills that's going to further help them throughout life, as we know, as they work with individuals throughout their careers and their schooling. So it's really important to kind of differentiate between that teasing and sort of those subcategories of the teasing that Bob mentioned, and then this pure conflict and how to address it. And then of course we know that bullying is very different. So bullying is really that exertion of some sort of perceived power with the intent to harm. And that's really key. And so what we do in our roles is really try to figure out what's going on, talk to students to understand the full situation, to identify how it needs to be addressed and who needs to be involved in that. But Tracy's going to talk a little bit about just what you can look for when you're home with your students and helping to identify these situations.
So I guess I got some signs, and before some of the more subtle ones, I thought I should share a little story about when sometimes it's obvious that there might be a teasing situation or a conflict with friends. I was thinking back, I was telling Jen 2 years ago, so the current sophomores, one day I hear like rumblings in the hallway, and they're like, Miss Domit, something happened. I'm like, oh no, what is it? And you just see these two guys walking up, best friends the day before, and I'm telling you the next day, best friends. And as they walk up to me, there's a ripped polo shirt, like the whole collar's ripped off. They're steaming mad, like coming in. And it was in the moment the most obvious sign of pure conflict I could think of, right? They couldn't look at each other. They were friends the next day. They were probably friends when they left my office 40 minutes later and we were joking about some sort of candy that they wanted to eat. But right then was an obvious sign of this conflict. So there are times where it's right in front of us. It's in front of us at school, and maybe those parents never heard about it when they got home, right? We got a new polo shirt, so it might have been totally under the radar. Maybe they talked about it and they wanted to decompress what happened. Oh, I was so annoyed. But a lot of the times in school, we can pick up on those signs. So it can be harder when your parents at home because you're hearing it differently, right? You just have your son one-on-one, he might not want to share, or if he does, it might sound really, really bad, right? So I made myself a note. It always looks worse than it is. And I think that's a good note for even us. When a kid first comes down and they say, can I talk to you for a minute? You get their whole picture and then you say, okay. A lot of times you say, okay, give me a minute, I'm going to talk to everybody else involved, we talk to your teachers, hear what's happening in class, figure it out, and kind of help the students see some perspective, right? There's often a lot of layers to it. But some signs for you that your son is in particular having problems with a friend or with a group of friends that we want to kind of pass along. So the most common one, which is going to sound ridiculous, is he might tell you. So often, in that car ride, if you were at my grandparents were at our parent coffee the other week, on a car ride, grocery shopping, they might start complaining about something, right? They might complain about their friends, they might tell you something that's not fair, about somebody who's annoying them. I would listen for that. And again, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. You start to notice a pattern. He says one day that his friend that he made in the beginning of 7th grade, it's 8th grade, he's saying he's annoying him. Okay, take note, think about it. He mentions it again the next week. He mentions it again the next day. Maybe it's time to reach out to an advisor, to a guidance counselor, and just say, I think they're having an issue between each other. I think we need some help. We're going to talk about how we help. So we might mention it. Another thing is that he might stop talking about certain friends, right? So a lot of what we see is groups of friends, as Mr. Hamlet mentioned. A lot of times it might be who they came in with. So maybe they came in with a group of friends, they spent the whole first year still friends together, but your son actually, or another one of his friends has found new friends on the hockey team. In his team classes, he doesn't see the guys he grew up with anymore. So that distance is happening, and you might stop mentioning a friend. So you start noticing that somebody you used to talk about all the time, be texting, be Snapchatting, isn't mentioned anymore, it's worth asking, right? Hey, what's going on with Jake? You never talk about him anymore. You might get some information about something that happened. He might not want to attend events. So I think a good sign that there is an ongoing issue with a group of friends is if he was doing stuff with his friends or staying after school to do homework club with them, and now he wants to come home every day at the end of the day, right? And it's also peeling it apart. Is it stress? Does he just need a break? Often the week or two before a school vacation, all of the guys are at each other's wits' end, so that's natural to sort of want to come home. But if it's going on in people he used to hang out with, he's not mentioning it anymore, doesn't want to do stuff, then I think that's a good sign. Also, if he just seems a little defensive when you ask him about his friends. As Jen mentioned, a lot of our guys sort of self-regulate. And I would also stress that a lot of them come to us, right? A lot of the issues that we deal with that have to do with conflict between students, whether it's friends or group partners or whatever it may be, they come to us and we talk about it at school. So they might be working through it, but if he's defensive when you ask him about his friends, he's just like, ugh, don't push it. I would dig a little bit deeper or ask somebody else here too. And lastly, for issues with friends, unfortunately, I would say there's often no sign at all. They want to figure it out, or they want it to just fix itself, and they don't want to tell you that they're mad at their friends or that they're the one that keeps getting roasted at lunch, right? They want to sort of figure that out themselves. For bullying, we did want to touch on a little bit some signs of bullying, which can be a bigger picture thing, right? And as Jen mentioned, distribution of power, where one student is really picking on somebody. It's a consistent manner. It's making it so they're not being able to focus at school. Some signs for that are much more severe, right? So an unwillingness to go to school. So school avoidance as well. You know, they don't want to go the one day, they don't want to go the next day. That's a red flag that we would want to help look into, right? Changes in sleep patterns, a big decline in grades, and I would say a change in demeanor. So if your son's more withdrawn, more aggressive, those can be bigger signs of something that's going on. Whether it might not be bullying at all, it could be stress, it could be something else, but those are some of the bigger ones. I mean, I think as Mr. Mantle mentioned, even Jen mentioned, we don't have a lot of instances of bullying here, but we do have a lot of conflict issues, and they can kind of manifest in different ways. So I think keeping an eye out for some of those signs can be helpful. And then Jen's going to talk a little bit about what you can do as parents if you start to notice those.
Yeah, so just a few tips from your end. You know, again, the first thing is just be aware and be observant and kind of notice any changes in your son's behavior. That would be one of the first things you can do. And then second, and I think Wiseman talks about this a lot in the book, is just keep those lines of communication open with your son. And I know that can be difficult at times, but it's really helpful just to maybe approach him in casual manners, sort of move away from that let's sit down and talk lecture, and start having smaller, shorter conversations even in sort of these in the moment sort of times while you're doing something else maybe. Maybe he's setting the table and you're making dinner and you can just have a casual conversation. Again, kind of keep it short. And I think it's helpful for them just to know that you're aware of sort of adolescent issues. So saying things to your sons like, hey, I hear that teasing is a thing that goes on a lot at your age. And, I hear that sometimes kids just say, hey, we're just joking around, but other kids feel harmed by it. What do you think about that? Do you ever experience this? I'm here for you if you ever want to sort of talk about that. Maybe we can come together and find ways to talk to your friends to help this, to kind of alleviate this situation. So again, knowing that, helping your son know that you're on their side, but also you're not going to over-exaggerate or exasperate a situation every time he mentions something to you that's going on in his life. So again, keeping those lines of communication open is really helpful. Looking out for some of those warning signs if you're noticing things like this. And of course, lastly, feel free to reach out to us at any time. We can help you sort of have some conversations with your son. We can give you some advice on how to do that. And then we can also talk to students here at school, which we do a lot of. We do a lot of mediations here when we come into situations where there's peer conflict, situations that get out of hand. Just going to talk to you a little bit about what those mediations might look like.
Yep, so a lot of times when it is a conflict, both between friends and also sometimes just peers, so with these projects, I can think of the beginning of 7th grade last year, like somebody took somebody's pencil pouch during the test and it was like, you messed up my math test. There's this whole kerfuffle, right? So in that moment, we have a mediation, right? So that, but also with friends. So the guys with the ripped polo shirts, guys, a lot of the times what we do is we sit them down and we might begin either Jen or I by talking to the students individually, right? So whether it's reported to us by the students themselves, by a teacher, an advisor, or a parent, a lot of times we'll call one of them down, like, what's going on? So tell me a little bit about what's happening with your friend. So we get some details, say, you know what I think would be really helpful if we sat down together and we sort of talked it out, we set some guidelines. So we call that a mediation here. We don't always tell the boys that that's what it's called because any sort of formal word freaks them out. But we bring them together and we sort of do a specific process. So we have each boy share what happened. It's often based on an incident, right, or ongoing maybe teasing. So one shares what happened in their instance, what, why they're upset about it, what was frustrating, and the other one can't talk. So we set some guidelines. You can't speak back or argue against them. And then it's the next boy's turn, and he shares what it was like for him, what was happening on his side. And then we sort of say, okay, so that didn't work. What can we do moving forward? We actually set some terms that we agree to. So they're not big, contracts of any kind, but we do sort of write down. Okay, so in Latin class, you're going to sit by somebody else. Yes, you can both agree to it. Yes, okay, we write it down. Okay, in the lunchroom though, you're going to sit together. Okay, at lunch we're good, we're friends. Okay, we write that down. Lunch we'll sit together. Okay, and you're not going to mention whatever it might be that you said that really made him mad. Okay, and we write it down. We actually kind of go over it, and they sign it. They sign a little contract that agrees to this is what we're going to do going forward. A lot of times, I will tell you, especially when it's between friends, halfway through, they are laughing with each other. The formality of it sort of makes them realize that it wasn't as big of a deal. I can think of some, actually, with Mr. Gozo last year, where by the end we were having fun. Like the guys, they were friends picking on each other. They knew exactly what to say to make the other one mad. And they start to say, well, I know that if I say to him something about, his sister, him something about, his weight, him something about this, that makes him the most mad. I'm like, okay, you guys you're devious. But they can figure it out, they know what they're doing, and they can sort of resolve it. Sometimes with a mediation, it might not be friends. It might be just two guys who don't know each other that well, but they just get on each other's nerves in a class. And that can be helpful too, to have some guidelines written out. Here's what you agreed to. So if you do violate it, we gotta come back here and talk about it again. I would say that's what we do most of the time. There are times where we don't talk to them together ever. So while it might not be a big deal, we still just talk to one and say, hey, cut it out. You can't keep doing that. You're really bugging the other guy. And in our kind of thought process as we work through it, it's better to just do it separately, and we know that one student will listen to us. But a lot of times with these conflicts, we end up in mediation. And that sort of happens once we've looked into it, which is that we're going to pass back to Mr. Hamlet about what happens when something is reported and it gets investigated and it's a little bit bigger of a situation.
Just before I talk though, any questions for them or comments or thoughts, things that have worked well for you?
I have one question. You talked about signs, and I think that a lot of us might know or familiar with what to do or to recognize that your own child is being bullied or picked on. But are there signs that you can look for that your son is the aggressor, like that are on the other side of things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there can be. I think a lot of times when you start to have these discussions with the sons, I think you mentioned it too, Tracy, that they get really defensive right away. So in an instant when you're saying, hey, I hear guys are, they can be teasing each other at this age, what do you see? I think that if you see a little bit of anger come out in them or a little defensiveness, that could be possibly a sign. Typically when you talk about the traditional bully, there's some hurt and some anger there, and that's what that acting out is coming from. So it can be deep and hard to identify at times. Certainly if the school communicates to you that there's a situation, we'll let you know what's going on and what the boys' roles might be in that situation, and then how to get that student some help.
I think sometimes also in Wiseman's book, she talks about not just the mastermind and wingman, but she kind of delves into different roles that kids play in a friend group, especially in the boy group. And I was talking to a parent the other week who had read it. She's like, I'm just curious. I just asked him, what do you think you are in this group? Are you the mastermind? Are you, the sidekick? Are you the wingman? She lists out a couple, and she said it was really interesting to have her son sort of think about it, I guess I'm this. And not that being the mastermind is bad, but it's sort of interesting to hear their power dynamic or how they see it, which I think can be a telling sort of sign. Something else, no, I can't remember what it was. I think even we just did the power words lesson, the boys they are unbelievably forthcoming once you sit them down and you talk to each other, you use bad language sometimes. Who says it the most? And they're you say it to your friends the most. So not, you say, okay, so do you hear it a lot? Even just continuing those conversations, so saying like, you know, the guidance counselors were up there, do you guys really use bad language? And not that it's bad if your son says, yes, he does, but starting to pay attention, like, is it really becoming a habit? Is he maybe one of the aggressors who doesn't know?
You know, listening to everybody, it feels like, you know, the kid's personality has a lot to do with it as well. You know, like, I know my kid's kind of quiet, and he's changed over the last couple of years, and as Mr. Himmel said, it's a dynamic change, 7th, 8th, 9th. You know, I kind of worry that he's going on a DC trip, and they said, did you sign up to be have a roommate? And that was one of the assignments, because I'm nervous in my own mind that I'm going to be by himself. At first, you got to develop friendships. I know BC High does a great job of, you know, things such as the city, last year, in the 8th grade, doing different things so we create different friendships. But along with those friendships and the growth comes conflict and new growth and different dynamics. So I think it all has to do with the personality as well. I'm trying to keep an eye on that.
And I think by default, I've talked to a lot of the 8th grade parents and things like this before, just coming into a big school and having all these different friend groups, kids from everywhere, it's tricky. And I think by 8th grade, it looks different, because at first you might default to like the kids you know from soccer, the kids you know here, or you don't know people, so you're sort of floating around and other people have a group of friends. So it definitely takes some time to sort of read through and build those friendships.
And you're right, they're all maturing at different rates, and so some of them are getting to certain points much faster than others, and are able to build those relationships in different ways. And that's why on our end, you know, I think you can trust us that we do keep an eye on every student. You know, the advisor role and the assigned guidance counselor, there are eyes on your sons constantly, and we notice things, we pick up on things. We're in the lunchroom, you know, is anyone sitting alone? Has anyone really shifted friend groups that we need to kind of talk about or look into? So I think it's a nurturing environment in that sense for all personalities.
When we get a call or a kid comes in the office, or often a parent calls us to say, hey, my son's being picked on, or the report comes in, and just more from the parent. You know, goodness to go, so goodness is our senior students. He or I, or both of us, will try to investigate, figure out as much as we can what's going on. You know, again, oftentimes there are two sides to it. And when there are two sides to it, so we hear complaints from both sides, and it sounds, as far as we can tell, legitimately seems like there are two sides to it. Then we usually give them the option, like, hey, we can handle this as a discipline situation. And we can get you both in trouble in some way. Or we can have you meet with the guidance counselors and do a mediation. They always choose the latter there, and they go, and again, Tracy and Jen do a wonderful job of that, and sort of helping them. You just kind of get everything on the table, figure it out, come up with a good solution. But other times it's not. Other times it is just one way. And when it is that, usually the boy is the target just wants it to stop. And his biggest fear is whatever I do is going to make it worse. But if he's gotten to the point where he's comfortable coming to me, generally speaking, it's pretty bad, and he doesn't know any other way out of it, and his parents have convinced him they have to come in and talk to us. So our biggest goal in that situation is, one, not to make it worse, and two, just to make it stop. And sometimes that's pretty easy. Sometimes it is a matter of sitting down with the boy who is responsible and saying, here's what we're hearing, here's what, and this is causing pain, and so that, hey, he's not happy about this, it hurts, and it just needs to stop. And with a pretty heavy warning, if it doesn't stop, you know, then it's repeated, then it's asking to start reading some of the things from the Massachusetts bullying law, you know, depending on who the boy is and how much we think we need to push in. We try to make it very serious, and, you know, it's got to stop. If it doesn't stop, more issues are going to happen. But most of the, you know, again, a lot of times it is a matter of he didn't realize it, or he kind of knew it deep down, but just sort of ignored the signs that his friend was miserable, his other kid was miserable. And oftentimes they will stop. And, you know, we have to sort of work with the guidance counselor to figure out how we sort of work with that. Now, there's the other part about making sure, if it's really bad, then stopping is only part of the problem, part of the solution. The other part is making sure that victim feels he's safe, feels he's comfortable. And, you know, if it's really bad, sometimes that's harder to do. Sometimes they don't feel safe being in the same place, in the same school. And so there's really two options there. One is, you know, if it's bad enough, you're going to look at an accountability board and moving the other board out of the school. That's very, very rare. One of the things we've been trying to do as we see some of the just escalation in incidents which we don't really think are necessarily calls out maliciousness, one of the, but cause tremendous pain nevertheless, is we sent a lot of people last summer to some workshops on restorative justice. And Gadista and I went, and it's a pretty common thing now with the idea of, it's tried out in Rwanda and in Northern Ireland, and they actually teach it in the schools in Northern Ireland, that idea that, you know, it's one thing to make it stop, it's another thing to try to heal that bridge in some way. And so we did it, we had a pretty bad incident early in the year, and we tried it out for the first time, and basically you have the hurt party, and oftentimes that's more than just the individual who's hurt. Sometimes it's the parent who's been hurt by the whole situation, the school who's been hurt, but you represent faculty members from the school, say this is the way, when we hear this is done to our community, within our community, this is the way it impacts us. But you have the people who've been hurt by the action, as well as the person who committed the action. And you work through it. It's a whole process to do. We did the training this summer. We did multiple sort of practice rounds with it. It was more fun to play with the rest of the person. Or actually the parent of the person who did the harm. It was a lot of fun to play. But anyways, you do the roles and you work through it, and eventually you get to a point where the victim, the Greek person, is able to say, this is what I need to feel safe. And what you're also hoping is on the side of the person who caused the harm, his apologies are legitimate. And that he, by listening to it, by hearing it all, hearing the different things, but seeing it, he realizes, he feels, okay, this is what the damage I've done. And what we really try to do is build empathy. And has some empathy for that and is able to, therefore, move on. Because at this age, when they're in trouble, they consider themselves the victim. Even no matter what they did, once they get into trouble, there's a piece of them that's extremely defensive and feels the victim themselves. And the nice thing about the process is it does seem to get them beyond just saying, an accountability board, sometimes when we come out of accountability board, we realize the boys just say, tell me what to say, I'll say anything you want me to say to get out of trouble because I don't want to be here. And that's a very different situation. There's a good that's pretty age appropriate at this age, and that's where they want to be. That's different from the boy who starts to really feel that, wow, that's how he felt, that's how she felt, that's how the school felt. Internalizes that and starts to feel some empathy. So it is something we're always trying to find the best practices we can. We again sent quite a few people to restorative justice training over the summer. And so that has been part. Fortunately, this year we haven't had many opportunities where we thought it was time to use it. But that is, so again, I think from the. It's always easy from the outside to say, boy, someone does something like that, you got to kick them out of school. But, it's what we do is we work with adolescents. And, we very unlikely to want to just give up on an adolescent despite them doing something horrifying. So really it's about trying to make sure. But we will dismiss a student from the school, and we think that's the only way to repair the damage to the community. That it can't be repaired if that students still here. That's a long way to go. I mean, yeah, sometimes I think, boy, I should just have an automatic policy to do that and get rid of it. But there's also damage to the community you do when you have that. We really stress around here, we're a community. Everyone's a part of this community, we're trying to build community all the time. And communities are fragile and, you know, they are difficult. One of the great things about boys is, for the most part, they move on pretty quickly. And the boy who's really, really hurt, and you know, sometimes it can work pretty well. The guidance counselors do a phenomenal job sometimes in building these things. And so it can, you know, I think sometimes it sticks with us longer than it sticks with them. They move on very quickly. If we ever go nowhere, a different discussion.
Let's talk about it.
This is like why I'm not in favor of that. Well, thank you all for coming in this morning, and